Welcome to AP Environmental Science. In this video, we are going to discuss acid rain. We'll talk a little bit about how it forms and the impacts that acid rain has on both humans and the environment. As a brief refresher, remember that the pH scale measures the acidity of a substance, and that's really measuring the amount of free hydrogen ions that are available. Pure water has a pH of 7. Ocean water is slightly on the base side with a pH of 8.1. Rainwater is slightly on the acid side with a pH of 5.6. But what we are really concerned about is when a substance becomes a pH of 4.3 or lower. This is making it a very strong acid that can cause a lot of impacts on humans and the environment. Also, keep in mind the pH scale is a logarithmic scale. Think back to your math classes and how a single number change in the log scale actually is a tenfold increase. So we're seeing a large change from neutral to a pH of 4.3. I would like you to pause this video and take a look at this diagram and sketch this diagram into your notes. I think this does a good job of summarizing the entire process of acid deposition and acid rain. From that diagram, you could see that nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides were emitted from both anthropogenic and natural sources. These are primary air pollutants. After they are in the atmosphere, they go through a series of reactions with water, and that water then converts those primary pollutants into secondary pollutants, and those secondary pollutants then fall to the surface as acid rain or acid deposition if it is just the particulate matter. You need to know the exact anthropogenic and natural sources that emit these primary pollutants that lead to acid rain. So regular combustion of fossil fuels, if it's in a motor vehicle like a car or a semi, that is going to emit nitrogen oxides. Coal-fired power plants are going to emit sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides. You need to know that. Both of those are sources of these primary pollutants that then can be converted into the secondary pollutants that lead to acid rain. There are natural sources of these same pollutants from volcanoes, decomposition, and lightning. However, they are pretty well distributed throughout the globe and are not emitting nearly the same concentration of these primary pollutants. Some of the impacts of coal-fired power plants would be, again, that emission of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide from the smokestacks. Now, these power plants do not want to have this pollution right in that same community. In fact, they follow the mantra of dilution is the solution to pollution, where if they build a larger smokestack, that means that the pollution is going to have more time to disperse in the atmosphere, and then it won't be as concentrated, and then they'll slip underneath that regulation levels. But here's the flip side to that. If you have a taller smokestack, that means the pollutant can spend more time in the atmosphere, which means it has more time to react with the water, which means it has more time to turn into acid rain. So even though we are diluting that pollutant, we are increasing the likelihood to produce acid rain. And that pollution is dispersed downwind from that power plant, and that's going to impact those communities hundreds of miles away from where that electricity is being generated. This acid deposition is going to severely impact soils and forests. We're going to see a lot of dead trees in areas that are impacted by this acid rain. Now, you need to know this, so make sure to write this down, make sure to turn it into flashcards and to study it. One of the main impacts is called aluminum toxicity. So the acid rain promotes the aluminum ions that are naturally in the soil to leach out. and that means that the plants are going to uptake this aluminum through the roots. This is going to cause toxicity to those plants and to aquatic life. Calcium deficiency is a result of this aluminum toxicity because the trees are not able to uptake that calcium when these aluminum ions are present. So again, calcium is critical for normal cell function within these plants. Now, if you do not have this calcium, you are going to have reduced photosynthesis. So those damaged needles, damaged leaves, these nutrient deficiencies, this means those plants are going to die. And that's all because we had this acid rain fall on the ground. We are also going to see these impacts on aquatic life. Remember back in the early units of this course, we talked about the range of tolerance for certain organisms. Most aquatic organisms can only exist in a very narrow set of conditions. So if we have a change in the pH of the water, these organisms are not able to survive. This can lead to premature death, it can lead to skeletal deformities, and it can also lead to damaged eggs and damaged larval growth. Additionally, we can see these impacts on human man-made structures. Now, believe it or not, this is a picture of the exact same statue, just a few decades apart. Many statues are made from marble, which contains calcite, and that calcite is dissolved by acids. So many of the early and Renaissance sculptures are being eroded away, and we are losing part of our cultural history and our cultural heritage by having this acid deposition erode away many of these statues and the intricate facades on buildings. Now, it's not all entirely bad news. There are some regional differences that make more places susceptible than others. The bedrock geology of a particular area determines the type of soil that is found there. We covered that back in Unit 4. These soils determine how vulnerable an area is to that acid deposition. If there is a lot of magnesium and calcium carbonate and limestone in that soil has the ability to buffer or neutralize that acid, so then we are not seeing these severe impacts. However, if you have a lot of granite in the soil, you're going to have very thin, very nutrient-poor soils, and these are particularly vulnerable to acid deposition. Now, I have two maps on this slide. The larger map with the purple on there, that is showing the areas in North America that are particularly sensitive to acid rain due to their bedrock geology. Now, on the map on the bottom, we see where acid rain is happening in the United States, and that's particularly in the northeastern quarter of the country. Now, there's a bit of an overlap between the red and oranges of the bottom map with the purples, and those are the places where we see the most severe impacts from acid rain. Now, again, there are things we can do, as discussed in other videos, to reduce those nitrogen oxides and the sulfur dioxides that are leading to acid deposition. So in summary, you should be able to explain how atmospheric pollution leads to acid rain and acid deposition. You should be able to identify the sources of those primary pollutants involved in creating this acid rain, and describe the impact of acid rain on soils, forests, aquatic ecosystems, and man-made structures, and be able to explain why acid rain is of greater concern in some areas compared to others. Again, I know this was a lot of information, and I know I went through it really quickly, but please pause the video, go back, rewatch it, and send me your questions here at the end. I'll get back to you as soon as humanly possible, and I hope that as you watch this video, you were able to learn something.